Hello, and welcome to Just One Q, the podcast where we explore the latest ideas in workplace belonging in conversation with thought leaders and experts. Each episode, a guest and I dive into a question that highlights their area of expertise, and the goal is to leave you with tools and insights you can use to make your workplace better and more human-friendly. I'm your host, Dominique. I'm an inclusion educator and advocate working for Dialectic, an inclusive workplace learning consultancy in lovely Guelph, Ontario, which is situated on the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional lands of the Chinooktun and Haudenosaunee peoples. Today, the question that we're going to be asking and exploring on the show is, how can we elevate disability inclusion to true belonging? And this question and conversation have stemmed from a working collaboration between myself and our guest on the Disability Inclusion Learning Snippets program. This is an intermediate level program that equips learners to confidently and respectfully include disabled colleagues and clients and to consider access in workplace practices. So it explains core concepts, challenges, ableist mindsets, and offers practical inclusion and belonging strategies. If you want to learn more about that program, please check out the links in the show notes of this episode to guide you to a webpage about it. And this lovely collaborator and guest who is with me today is Ingrid Palmer. Ingrid is an award-winning speaker, best-selling author, and social justice consultant. She is the principal ideal advocate at Realize Canada, which is an organization dedicated to supporting people living with HIV and episodic disabilities. Ingrid's dedication to advancing EDI principles is deeply rooted in her living experiences of early childhood trauma, foster care, disability, and gender-based violence. As a visually impaired former foster kid, Ingrid founded an organization called Focus on Ability to combat ableism, challenge bias, promote universal belonging, and drive systemic change, and debunk myths and stereotypes of stigmatized identities. Her acclaimed storytelling and writing highlights traditionally unheard perspectives of intersectionality, marginalized leadership, and community capacity. As an advocate, she has championed issues in the housing, poverty, education, disability, and child welfare sectors. She has been instrumental in initiatives of poverty reduction, decent work, and gender equity. As a social consultant, Ingrid has supported government, corporate, and community organizations with community outreach and equity development. Her background in service includes board chair of the Child Welfare Political Action Committee and vice chair of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. Ingrid is a married mom of 3, a grandmother of 1, and she is joining us today from Toronto. Hello and welcome to the show, Ingrid.
Hello, Dominique, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm super excited to finally get to talk with you on air about the things that we've been chatting about for months behind the scenes and bringing this conversation to our audience. I really appreciate you making the time to be here and to share your wisdom with us about this topic.
I'm really excited as well.
So I want to dive straight in. The thing that really stands out to me about you and your work is your focus on belonging rather than simply inclusion. We often hear the terms inclusion and belonging used interchangeably. So I want to ask you, in your experience, where does a policy end and true belonging begin?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about inclusion and belonging being treated as synonyms, and they really are not. So let's maybe try to see if we can piece apart the differences between them. We see pretty much often everywhere now policies around inclusion for every type of organization that say that everyone is welcome here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what policies do. They talk about inclusion. They talk about the rules of engagement. Diversity is promoted. Accommodations are perhaps provided. So inclusion is something that systems are doing.
Yeah,
Belonging is something that people do and that people feel.
right.
So while policy really is kind of like on the ground floor of building belonging, it's just not the end all and be all. And one of the things that we see about organizations is they feel that once they've created a policy around inclusion, that they've done their due diligence, that
Right.
they've created care, and that just isn't the case. We have seen, many beautifully written inclusive policy statements that coexist with very deep exclusive cultures.
Mm,
And so policy tells us that we're allowed to be in a particular place, whereas belonging gives you the message that you are actually wanted to
yeah.
be there. And those are two very different things.
Hmm. Can you
Hmm.
give an example maybe of a time where a diversity or inclusion policy or effort within an organization felt short of creating belonging?
Yeah, so in my work at Realize, we do a lot of research around intersectionality and employment and access to work in the Canadian labor market. And so we speak to community a lot. Our
Hmm.
research is community based. So we are having focus groups, we're having conversations, we are bringing people together to really uncover the nuances of experiences that are happening. And so from our community, we'll hear about policies in the workplace that are written to with the ideal or with the intent of creating belonging, but that fall short in many ways. And so we'll hear about, like what I said before, about having workspaces that promote these things on paper, but employees feeling really stigmatized in the
Mm,
workplace, which
hmm.
goes against the very concept of belonging. So, which shows that you can invite people in and you can have inclusive policies and programs in place. But when you invite a person into a space, but then don't ensure that they are actually involved in what's going on in every aspect of the environment, then belonging just can't flourish. So we hear from some employees about only being spoken to in regards to work. And so not being included in, side conversations, perhaps that are more personal,
Yeah.
might be about what you did on the weekend or how your families are doing. And so if you are only ever engaged with the process of the actual work, but anything outside of that you are excluded from, that
Mm,
is not conducive to belonging.
of course.
When
Yeah.
you go to the lunchroom, and, of course, you can sit at any table that you want, but that doesn't mean that you are included in the conversations that are going on, or that you feel a sense of welcoming and belonging. And so this is where policy around inclusion and actual tangible
Mm,
feelings of belonging don't necessarily coincide. And this is where employers really need to take a good look at the culture of their organizations, the attitudes and perceptions of other employees, what it means to be living with stigmatized identities, and that gap then, therefore, that can exist between what a policy is attempting to do and the realities of what is actually happening.
right. Yeah. So that belonging piece sounds, it's obviously very interpersonal or social, and it can be subtle. There's that cultural piece. It's like it exceeds what we can put down on paper. I'm wondering if you can speak from your personal experience and maybe share some of those small things that people have done for you that have created the biggest sense of connection and belonging in a space.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. One of the first things that comes to mind that I remember is when actually I was invited to co-facilitate a 2-day disability-focused hybrid summit where 32 disability serving and led organizations were invited to participate in this event. And I was so excited because I was co-facilitating. My co-facilitator was another Black woman who lives with deafness. And so you have one Black blind woman and one Black deaf woman co-facilitating this really fantastic event.
Hmm.
And so in their efforts to have everything ready for the event, there was a moment during the 2 days when they were going to be showing a video. And they did say that unfortunately they hadn't been able to put all of the accessibility into the video in
Mm.
time before the video was going to be shown. So while they had ASL and they had captioning, they hadn't had the time to finish doing the voiceover. So they announced this and then started playing the video. So I knew that for myself, I wasn't going to know everything that was happening with the video.
Right.
And then a few seconds into the video, I felt someone beside me and heard a voice say, "Can I describe for you what's happening?" And this person took it upon themselves and interpreted for
Mm.
me what was happening. And I just remember how touched I was. She saw a gap and that she took immediate action to do something, to do what she could to fill that gap, because we don't always see that.
Yeah.
You hear about other meetings where something similar to this happens, and what you hear is, "Oh, well, we'll get it right next time.
Right.
Next time we'll do it." And that doesn't land well because you in the moment are left out and your lack of accessibility or accommodation is normalized in that moment.
Mm.
And that's the error that we see a lot of times. So
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
highlight how important it is to try to do something,
Yeah. We
you
all
know,
know
where,
that next time may not come, right? Or like, who's
or
to say?
sometimes there's always a next time too.
Sure. Right. Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
this perpetual kicking of the ball down the
Yes.
road. And then the person who would benefit from that, deliberate accommodation or access is not, is kind of like left there for the moment without that support that you're expecting or that you would help you feel that sense of belonging and connection. Um,
I
that's
can give you one more
yeah,
example if that's
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
Because this one still impacts me today and I teach it to other people. So years ago, because when I go to a space, there are certain things that I can always usually count on happening. I can count on being helped inside. I can count on having my jacket taken and help to, have that hung up, help to a seat, and help to food.
Hmm.
But one day, someone, and this is someone who was really close to me, but she had me hold the fork. She got me a plate of food, and then she took my hand and she showed me exactly what was on the plate and where. This is
Mm.
chicken, this is noodles, this is rice. And the great thing about that was that usually I'm given a plate of food and then I just discover what's on it haphazardly. I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm bringing to my mouth. And sometimes you do these weird combos because you just don't know. And it's like you wouldn't have chosen to do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the great thing with that is that it gave me back some power.
Yeah.
Knowing what exactly was there and where gave me the power to say, okay, I'm going to have chicken first. I'm going to
Mm.
start with this, where usually it was just like, well, let's see what's coming to my mouth. And that's something now that I ask other people to do. Like, give me a plate
Mm.
and I say, hey, can you show me what's on the plate? And those are two really impactful things that people did on their own to mitigate a situation for me that are really memorable and
Yeah.
it really made me feel good.
They're both amazing examples, and I want to dive into this because they're both a little intimate. Like, I feel, people are so afraid of overstepping or committing a microaggression when they engage with a disabled person that often they end up doing nothing at all. So, what is your advice to the person who has it in their heart to do something like that, but is afraid of doing the wrong thing?
That's another really great question because sometimes we can make things a lot bigger than they need to be. And as we've shown, the really small actions that someone takes are really the things that end up having the bigger and deeper impact. And you're so right about fear being something that can really hold people back from offering assistance. And so, like, I've heard this so many times, and it can actually be like a real pet peeve for people with disabilities to see organizations or individuals actually choose to do nothing
Mm.
rather than making a mistake because that fear of like what you said, like overstepping or
Hmm.
committing an error in communicating with a person with disability is so scary. But fear really prioritizes ableism, and that's the problem with that. And communicating and asking questions and just doing these really normal human things are really the counteragent to that.
Hmm.
So saying to someone, I don't want to make a mistake. Could you give me some guidance? How do you like to be referred to? How do you refer to yourself? What can I do or is there anything I can do to help you feel more comfortable in this space or to be able to participate in the ways that are meaningful for you? Or even just reminding someone that I'm here for you if
Hmm.
you do need something in any way or have a question. And I have people sometimes say that to me more than once and then say, I hope I'm not bothering you by repeating that. And I always assure them that you are absolutely not, and how much I appreciate when someone lets me know that they are available to me if I need it. That offers so much comfort, and that leaves agency in my hands
Hmm.
to reach out if I need it, and that it's okay. Like if I don't, I can go on about my business. And so that asking for consent is so important because we all have heard stories of really well-intentioned people who just dive right in
Yeah.
with what they think people need. So I have been dragged across the street by somebody who really wants to help me get to the other side. And it's like, oh, I one wasn't going that way, and two, being dragged is a horrible feeling. Um, there's a proper way to guide someone, and you know, when you're not, and sometimes when these folks sometimes receive correction, they're so offended. I've actually had people say to me, I'll never help a
Right.
person with a disability again. It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's taking it like so far. And the best thing to do is to ask, do you need help?
Hmm.
May I be of assistance to you? And that person will say, yes. Could you ABC or no? I'm fine. And either answer is okay, but it is such an incredibly wonderful thing to offer. The key, though, is that consent remains in the individual hands.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
And in both of the stories that you told, that piece was there. I mean, the person who described the video to you did ask whether they could do that before they began. Like, is this going to be of help to you? Do you want
Hmm.
that? And then in the second case, sometimes it seems like you have a close relationship with that person already. So there's just that friendship or trust relationship is already there, and they were able to take your hand and guide it to show you what's on your plate. And like, these are not that different from other forms of help or intimacy that we share with colleagues or people in the public, right? Like,
Hmm.
you have to just make sure that you are respecting that person's agency and
Yeah.
seeking that consent. Yeah, it makes complete sense.
And I have absolutely been
Yeah.
approached by strangers as
Yeah.
well on the street saying, sometimes perhaps I'm just waiting, but maybe I look lost. And maybe a couple times I am. And they'll say, oh my goodness, can I help you? Do you need help? And I
Yeah.
can say, oh my goodness, yes, I'm looking for this place. And
Right.
they will take me there. Or I can say, no, actually, I'm just waiting for somebody else. I'm just meeting someone.
Right.
But every time I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I appreciate that someone has thought of me, has seen me, and has taken the time to inquire if I am okay.
Hmm.
Those are always welcome.
Well, that's, I'm sure, really, some people will be glad to hear that, because that fear piece is unfortunately very strong. And I think some training that people receive also feeds into this around the microaggression piece, for example. Like, I think
Mhm.
there is just a bit of, yeah, just a little bit of awareness, or maybe over awareness of overstepping when people are just people. And there's also just use your manners and your common sense. So that
Yeah,
I'm glad to
and
hear
we
that.
all we all step in it. Like I
Yeah.
always say this, like we're not perfect beings, and I have said things that are off and been called on that, and a quick apology and correction is all that's needed in that
Mm-hmm.
case.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can take the apology like way too far to where it once again centers you instead of
Yeah.
just acknowledge a mistake when it's made, correct, and move on. And on the other end, we can have the grace to receive apologies because none of us are perfect and we never know when it's going to be us inadvertently saying something or
Mm-hmm.
using a term that's, no longer used. And when we get corrected, I think the appropriate thing is to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And to apologize and then to move on. And when you don't know someone's pronoun, use their name or ask them.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
okay to ask. And another thing sometimes I say is the default to they.
Yeah. Yeah.
But don't make assumptions on how a person identifies. And I really just feel like we're so afraid of direct communication, although that is the best and actually the fastest answer to what is most respectful to that person is simply to ask. And when it comes to disability first or person first, because I often get asked what
Yes.
is correct,
Yeah.
and that's so individual. And that's where we ask, how do you refer to yourself? And follow that person's lead. I think that's really important. So questions are good.
Mm.
And if a person responds to you really negatively, and I think this is the same thing that I'll tell my children is always remember that is about that person and not about you. We have no idea what people are carrying,
Yeah.
their experiences, and where that could be coming from on that day. But also, we have our bad days too.
Of
We are,
course.
we are short-tempered. We have times when we react in ways that we wouldn't have on a different day at another time. So if we can extend grace to one another and just say, oops, okay, I'm off, but not to take it as, wow, I'm never going to offer assistance again because this one person spoke to me very rudely, and perhaps that person has not had their agency respected. And so for that
Mm.
reason, now they are like, perhaps responding in an aggressive way, but we don't have to internalize that either.
No,
We
maybe
can
they're
just be,
just in,
okay,
yeah,
sorry,
maybe
was
they
just asking, and
yeah. Maybe they're just in perimenopause and having a bad day.
hey,
You know? Never
it could
know.
be anything, or
It
they
could
could
be
have stubbed
anything
their toe 5 minutes before and
for sure.
still
Um,
not over that. Yeah.
so there's some people for whom overstepping is a concern.
Mhm.
But on the other side, on the flip side, there are folks who really downplay or gatekeep disability by deciding who is disabled enough to deserve support. So I want to talk about this. How does gatekeeping manifest in the workplace? And then maybe if you could speak to what is the cost of that in the culture?
Right. And so disability in the workplace is something that we also have heard a lot about in our work at Realize in the community. And it comes up in a couple different ways. And sometimes it's a really overzealous employee who somehow feels like they are protecting the organization and their resources. But what
Mm,
gatekeeping does is it protects power. It's not a good service. And it's such an ableist statement to say that you don't look disabled. That's just so rude. And I'm just remembering from myself as a parent of a child who is on the spectrum and having other people tell me, well, they don't look like it. And it's so like, what does that look like?
hmm
We just have these embedded assumptions about what different disabilities are looking like. And what expectations are. And people with invisible disabilities, which many episodic ones are, I think, face this disproportionately.
Right.
Also, with people making snide remarks about someone who is receiving an accommodation, treating accommodations as if, they are a prize or a bonus instead of something that is needed, making people feel uncomfortable about accessing what they have the right to. All of these are forms of gatekeeping that are not acceptable and that are really harmful. And the cost to the culture of a workplace around gatekeeping are that people will delay disclosing or they will not disclose at all. We know that 75% of Canadians working with disabilities said that they would not disclose.
Mm.
That's a horrible
Yeah.
percentage. That's
Yeah.
extremely high. And that is coming out of not only stigmatization around disability, but gatekeeping itself and this feeling that you have to disclose the most intimate parts of your lives in order to access what you are legally entitled to. So gatekeeping is just like such a harmful practice that really dissolves psychological safety,
Hmm.
that is so important that you need in order to access and to advocate for yourself in the workplace as well. And then there's also the case of other people with disabilities,
Yes. Yeah.
gatekeeping, and I don't know which
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
is worse. Other people deciding, well, you're not as disabled as I am, and this type of competition or hierarchy of disabilities and the different ways in which the system itself kind of pits people against one another because resources are always limited and you have this scarcity
Hmm.
mentality, then that too will play into people feeling like, well, you're gaining over me in some way that isn't deserved. And racialized people with disabilities are often face that as well, where you're kind of just automatically seen because of your identity as somehow being a type of person that is trying to get over something
Hmm.
on the system. And you'll see Black women, brown women, and Indigenous women with disabilities face this a lot, where they're accused of milking the system instead of genuinely being able to access something that they are absolutely entitled to.
Was this so shocking because it's like, if anything, people who have marginalizations because of other identities are going to be excluded from all kinds of supports or like not have access to, private supports or other alternatives necessarily. And so it seems like the people who would need it the most are being excluded the most by gatekeeping, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, because they're
Mm.
already receiving the minimum, and then people will also self-exclude
Mm.
because they don't want to add on to discrimination.
Yeah.
They don't want to try to access because they know the accusations are going to come, the
Hmm.
looks are going to come, the
Hmm.
snide remarks are going to come. And so many people with disabilities push through pain, push through exhaustion, fatigue, cognitive fog. Not accessing adaptable equipment, services, not asking for flexibility because the repercussion, the retaliation that they feel will come along with it, they would feel isn't worth it.
Hmm. So, what
Yeah.
can we do, like at a practical level, if I'm either a colleague or an employer? What can I do to make sure that nobody has that experience of access or gatekeeping of accommodations at work?
Well, I think that we have to have systems in place that openly support employees with disabilities, and we have to openly and frequently make the accommodation process known
Mm.
in order to work against that stigmatization. I also really like to take resources like accommodations out of the realm of disability. We keep associating it exclusively with disability, which in turn kind of deepens that stigmatization because it's not true. It's for everyone. Everybody has the right to accommodations when you need it, whether you are permanently disabled, whether you are temporarily disabled because of, it could be anything, an accident, an operation that you've just come through, and a diagnosis that might not be permanent, but you need it for that time. So to associate always accommodations with employees with disabilities, I think is very erroneous. It's wrong. It needs to be framed as something that is for everyone because that's the truth. That's the legislation. Whether or not you identify with disability, and we also know that disability is personal and not everyone uses that term, and that's fine. But whether you are living with a condition that's permanent, that's temporary, that's episodic, that's visible or invisible, once that condition intersects with a barrier, you are legally entitled to accommodation. And
That
so
is,
that
yeah,
broad
yeah.
definition, which the ACA gives, means that it's for everyone. And interesting, I've had questions sometimes where a person will say, well, my coworker got an accommodation, but that accommodation meant that I had to take on extra work. And now I am overloaded and I am being impacted negatively and
Mm,
it's not fair. And what is their solution? That that person shouldn't have gotten the accommodation. And I'm like, no, why isn't it that you too deserve an accommodation? So it's not that that person shouldn't have gotten their accommodation, it's that you need one too.
mm,
So you need to, your manager and your higher ups need to be looking at how can they support you now that you have an additional weight. What can they do to support you in order to do your work?
yeah.
It's not that the other person doesn't get it, it's that you need it too. And you always get this like, wow, like epiphany. And it goes back to that scarcity mentality where it's
Yeah.
like, I'm not getting it, so you shouldn't get it. But the attitude should be, you got it and I need it too.
Yeah. I
Not,
love that. I
yeah.
love the
So,
positive
it's,
framing and just having it as like an available to everyone and with the goal
yes,
of supporting work rather than compensating for a specific disability. Like just opening up that
right.
frame lets so many more people through the door. And it's about how do we function? How do we get our work done? How do we proceed through our professional responsibilities with dignity? And
Yes.
no, that's really
For
yeah,
everyone.
for everyone.
Yes.
I
It's
love
it's
it.
a everyone thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, something that we touched on a whole bunch in our work together so far with the Learning Snippets program on disability inclusion is intersectionality. This is a lens that was really important to bring to our work on this program. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about intersectionality. How can we move beyond a conceptual understanding of intersectionality and actually put it into practice? Like, if people understand what intersectionality is, and a lot of people do, maybe we'll define it for people who don't. But even beyond that, what does it mean in terms of how we treat people in the real world?
Intersectionality is really about thinking how different people with different identities and different intersections move through the world and what different barriers they might face or come into because of their identities that could be different from ours. And so it's about really understanding how the same policy in our workplace can land differently on different people because of their identity. And it's really important to understand how a variety of social factors and social discriminations really impact a person's ability to access resources, to navigate, and really just to live their lives.
Hmm.
So we think about a woman in the workplace. We know that a woman in the workplace is going to face certain things. The wage gap is there. There can be a ceiling to how far you can go
Hmm.
in your career. A woman with a disability is going to face that, and in addition, is going to face stigmatization on her ability to do her work in the ways that she does her work. A woman with a disability who also identifies as queer is also going to face additional scrutiny, additional adversity, additional barriers, being racialized on top of living with disability and identifying as LGBTQ is going to add another layer where you live, your social economic class, the level of education. There are so many different
Mm.
factors that can really impact your movement through our systems within society and in the workplace on building a career. And
Hmm.
the more understanding and openness and awareness that we have to this helps us to design our environments, not only physically, but emotionally, because we have to remember that access is not only about the built environment, but it's also about hearts and minds.
Hmm.
We can only effectively work to combat discrimination and stigmatizations through an intersectional lens. When we are open to the different levels of bias and adversity that comes with carrying one or more stigmatized identities.
Mm.
And without that integral lens, we're just always going to miss something. If we're
Yeah.
looking to support an employee with a disability, but we're not looking at the other identities that may be facing discrimination in the workplace, that's where the policies fall flat and we're not achieving belonging. Because if you're only focusing on one and you're missing the other areas, then those are still open for discrimination. And
Right. So
so then,
it's, yeah, in the area of program or policy design, right? Thinking about those almost like edge cases or who would be excluded from this policy that supports people with disabilities.
yes, we always have to be looking at who benefits
Mm.
and who is being left out. Because without that view, we're always going to miss something. So it's important to see the good that a policy is doing, but it's also important to investigate, is it at the same time blocking other people?
Yeah.
Who is erased by this policy,
Yeah. It also
right?
like the application of intersectionality, I think also has an interpersonal dimension too, right? Like instead of seeing a disabled person as just that flat unidimensional disability character, like we can kind of appreciate that there's a whole person there with all of these other characteristics, all of
Hmm.
these other possibly invisible things that are affecting their experience of the world. I want to segue with that into sort of this idea of portrayal and how we tend to flatten people who have disabilities in popular culture, in media, which really I think does affect the way that we view the lives of disabled people or the assumptions that we make. Where have you noticed this in media, like this kind of flattening of people who have disabilities?
It shows up in so many different ways. It shows up definitely in the media in the sense of like movies and films, and particularly I think first about like comics and how the anti-hero or the villain a lot of times is portrayed as someone who has been disabled through some type of accident or some type of event and then
Yeah.
becomes really bitter and angry and revengeful. And we consume these as children.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like to do when I'm teaching or doing training is I like to ask people like, how were you socialized to disability as a child? Because I want people to know how important it is that we get these subtle and unconscious messages that inform and influence on how we relate to people with disabilities, even now as adults. And you think there's so many popular movies that have done really well that portray characters living with disability, and only 5% of actors
Mm.
are actually involved in portraying those roles. 95% of roles are played by people without disabilities,
Right.
portraying people with disabilities. And we think of some really blockbuster movies like Forrest Gump or
Sure.
Rain Man or I Am Sam, Benny and June. And these are always told through the gaze of people without disabilities, for one thing. And for another thing, they usually tend to bend towards the medical model. So fixing, overcoming disability, and not looking at the ways that disability enhances or, it's beautiful, like, or
Yeah.
normal in
Yeah.
a person's life. Like, it's really told through an ableist gaze, majority of the time. And we think about how our Paralympians are portrayed, and all athletes, all Olympian champions are amazing athletes, and I'm never going to take that away from them. But our Paralympians are achieving their achievements with their disability,
Hmm.
not in spite spite of their disability. They're not overcoming their disability. They are doing it disabled. And we don't get that type of framing, though. It's usually framed as this superhero, superhuman, and then it gives other people with disabilities this messaging that you need to overcome, you need to be doing something akin to being a superhero in order
Mm.
to be valued or to be respected.
Yeah.
When we think about some organizations who are working for people with disabilities and with their fundraising campaigns, it always used to be the charity model and this pitying and this positioning as this poor people who have been disabled and oh my gosh, please have pity on them. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
their poor, terrible, burdened lives. And thankfully, we can see some organizations that have really moved away from this characterization of disability and are not depending on leaning on this charity model
Hmm.
in order to fundraise and give money. But there continues to be a real issue with how people with disabilities are positioned in the media. And
Hmm.
this directly influences how people associate or interact or communicate with people with disabilities. And this is where you'll see people talking in a childish high voice or talking to someone who's I can't tell you, the other day, I went to the hospital with my daughter who was having some issues. And we went there, and every stop we made, from just the registration to the triage, they turned to her and say, "What's wrong with her?" And I'm like, I am her support. There is
Right.
nothing wrong. So this assumption, even when you just see a person with a disability, that they must have a problem. They don't see us in positions of support or
Hmm.
strength, or we're constantly framed as being in need and needing help. So it's really problematic.
Yeah. I guess like there's some work to do there in terms of healing the way that we've been socialized. Like, I think obviously acknowledging that and seeing it is a huge first step. And then taking that next step to seek out, content creators and things like that who are people who have experiences of disability, who are in those positions of power or success, or who have a positive relationship with disability, and making sure that we're getting a balanced representation there so that we're not buying into that.
And it
It's
really does take
yeah,
representation in those seats, being at the helm,
yeah,
being in leadership in all kinds of areas in order to like prevent that, in
yeah,
order to catch that. Because that's been the issue, is that we haven't been leading, driving, directing. And so that's where this continuance
hmm,
of this modeling of disability as less than
yeah,
and inferior continues. So the more that we can have lived experience in positions of power and leadership in order to be influencing, to be directing, and that's where we're going to start seeing more of that change, and even the direct modeling of having people with disability in positions of power is important,
hmm,
and not only for our community, but for society at large, so that thinking around disability can also transform.
absolutely. Ingrid, should I read your bio again? Like, you know, it's important. I agree. And it's like that is one thing that I hope to see change. And I think it is kind of slowly moving in a different direction, but certainly not fast enough. Let's go.
Mhm.
Um, I want to talk about this idea, the tension. We mentioned this a little bit earlier at the top, but like the difference between accommodation, which is this reactive and procedural approach, and access, which is a little more proactive and a broader definition. Can you give some more words and just describe the difference between the two? And then maybe just some ideas about how we can move our teams and organizations toward access rather than just this reactive accommodation.
So I'm gonna repeat what you just said because it's so important, that accommodations are often reactive. They tend to focus on the individual, and they tend to be very procedural, whereas access is proactive. It's thinking ahead, planning before, it's collective because it's about everyone and it's cultural. It changes the environment of a place. And so it's the difference between really focusing on a medical model versus like a disability justice model. And so when we think about what messaging we receive from each accommodation is really asking about what do you need? What do you need in a space? Whereas access is asking about what did we design that excludes you? And so one is putting the onus on the individual, the person, and the other one is keeping the onus on the environment, on the system. So taking ownership over belonging instead of putting it on an individual person.
Mm.
It's also really important to look at the burden that we often put on people with disabilities that you have to advocate, you have to fight. And so access, again, is about keeping that ownership in the hand of where it belongs and making it a societal issue and stop making it about each individual person having to figure out their own path and what they're going to do, because that's how it has been um it has been weighted
Mm.
always
Mhm.
historically, that it's on that individual person to fight individually for what they need. And we want to move towards a system and a model that is thinking about society as a whole and always thinking universally.
Mm.
It's interesting that everything that people with disabilities have fought for and that have won, everyone benefits for every single time. The cutouts and the curves that, moms with strollers also use and seniors also use and children also use. When you think about it, I think it was about 10-year fight to get on transit on the buses to
Mm.
get the signage that was not only showing the stops, but then again afterwards to fight for a voice calling them out. And it was the pushback. Oh, you're going to disturb people who are reading. It was so ridiculous, the things that they would come up with. Everybody appreciates that.
Yeah.
Automatic doors, the fight that people with disability had to go through to get that. Everybody uses automatic doors and enjoys the benefits. But still, you would think that these precursors will have made it easier now, but it's still a fight,
Mm.
even though it always has been shown that everything that we put in place for people with disabilities is universal.
Mm.
Everyone benefits from it. So the more that we can think about that proactively from the start, instead of, because the retroactive fixes that people have to do is where the real cost is. We have this misconception that accommodations are so costly. They're not. What's costly is having to fix it when you are not accommodating everyone. That's
Mm.
what costs more when you have to go back and do it because you didn't do it to begin with. But doing it from the start, it saves money in the long
Right.
term. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
everything needs to be thought of universally. Even when we talk about now with the automatic, things in the washroom, I have trouble all the time getting to turn on the taps, waving my hand like crazy. And it's like, well, you know, we had tested these on everybody to begin with. You wouldn't have these issues. So all these little things that sometimes people want to say, oh, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. It is a big deal, and it's costly in the long term when we don't think of everybody in the planning stages, in the testing stages, and ensure that we are doing the best we can for the greatest amount of people. We're still humans, we're not perfect, but we'll always get as closest as we can to perfection when we are having everyone involved, when we're having lived expertise at the helm, not just consulting, and when we are taking the broadest scope that we can in all stages of everything that we do and incorporating that intersectional lens right from the beginning, right from the get-go.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think for me, the idea of access also invites this thought that who is in the room is limited if you're taking an accommodations approach, because access means that people can be there. And
Hmm.
and if
Hmm.
you're just accommodating, that means people have had to be excluded already. Like you're
Yes.
already not getting the full gamut of everybody in society.
Yeah.
You've excluded people before you've even begun. So I think that this access idea is really important. And there are so many ways that workplaces can push on that. We often think about events, but it's a lot more than events. It can be everyday processes and meetings and just the office setup requirements for being in person. All of these things are such huge examples, right?
Everything. And our attitudes
Mm.
towards participation. We don't all have to speak. That's not actually the most comfortable mode of communication for everyone. So can we normalize writing things down? Can we normalize like different ways of communication? Can we normalize sending, and we're getting better at that, sending agendas out in advance, being able to have input come after? So you're absolutely right. It's not just about events, but even that space is getting better. When you
Yeah.
think about the setup in places, and it's like trying to get through all those tables and chairs. And now we're seeing more spacing,
Yes.
intentional creation of paths in between, chairs. And then it's like, yay,
Yeah.
every time I encounter something like that, because I know that has come from our community and really explaining the importance of layout, that it's not just about inviting us here. If you invite us here, but it's impossible to navigate the space or uncomfortable or
Mm.
tedious, all those things work against us feeling like we really belong. And so thinking about us being in the space, not just inviting us to the space,
Mhm.
thinking about how we're going to actually be in the space, thinking about us actually being able to participate, not just attend, thinking about the communication going both ways, not just you giving a communication. And when I think about that, I'm thinking about deaf and hard of hearing people. Like people think, oh, well, we provided captions, so that's great, but that's only one way communication. If you without ASL, you're saying you can come and listen, but we're not going to hear your voice. Not
Mm.
fair, not cool. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great example. We've covered a lot of ground, but I want to throw this last question out to you. And it's a question I haven't asked a guest in a while. I used to do this often, but it's sort of like a reflection on your utopia. So when you dream about belonging being carried out to its fullest and most perfect extent, what does that look like for you? What becomes possible in your utopia?
Oh my goodness, I love this question. And my answer is that everything becomes possible, because then everyone can go everywhere
Mm.
and do anything, and environments are adaptable. Things can be moved and rearranged and lifted up or lowered, and there is no surprise or nothing is newsworthy because it's always expected that, of course, we can do it. Of course, a person with a disability did that, achieved that, is leading that, is in charge. There is nothing that's surprising. So my utopia is where, it's almost like, oh, everything is just expected. Nothing
Hmm.
is a surprise anymore to have a bus driver who's in a wheelchair driving our public transit and helping. Like, there's no position where a person with a disability, it's inspirational. It's just, oh yeah,
I
like
love
that.
that.
I always say that when things are no longer newsworthy and it's just a norm, it's no big deal. That actually is my utopia, which might sound kind of boring in a way, but that's what we're
No,
actually after.
it speaks to us about like what your challenges are, right? If your utopia is nobody's surprised that I can do stuff, that speaks to the world that people who are disabled are kind of living in right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
The amount of times I have people like, oh, you have a job. Yes, I work. I
Yeah.
do. You do? What do you do? It's like that shock that, and that sometimes that assumption, like people ask for my ODSP card. I don't have one.
Mm. Yeah.
I get to say that now. I wasn't
Yeah.
able to say that a while ago, but now I can say, no, I have benefits. I work and it's not surprising.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I want that like for everyone, where the sky is the limit, that no child living with a disability is limiting themselves to particular roles because they don't see that representation, because they can't envision, because no one's envisioning it for them, these possibilities.
Mm.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
yeah.
like that. I hope that your utopia comes true, Ingrid.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much for your continued dedication to disability belonging work and for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real joy, and this topic is really passionate and deep to my heart. And, when belonging is real, as I said, well, people won't have to prove that they're valuable. They'll just finally just be living their lives fully. So,
Yeah.
yeah, to have that
Amazing.
utopia will just be like amazing.
Let's get there. Let's get
Yes,
there.
please.
And to our listeners, if you are curious about Ingrid and her ongoing work, please check her out on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. And you can do that by following all the links in the show notes. And Ingrid has some documentary work to keep your eye out for. So we'll keep you posted on that as well.
Hmm.
And of course, please reach out to me if you'd like to be a featured guest on this podcast or if you'd like to sneakily nominate someone. I love having conversations with L&D, HR, or DEI professionals who are very passionate about their message, or with people in adjacent fields who have something to teach us in people and culture or in learning roles. If you like what you're hearing, please leave us a rating and a review or share this episode to your own socials. It really does help get this podcast and Ingrid's message into more ears. So we really do appreciate that. I am Dominique. Thank you so much for listening and see you next time on Just One Q.